The underestimated species. The galactic concordat had existed for 12,000 years before humanity stumbled onto the interstellar scene. A coalition of 17 advanced species that had mastered the art of bending spacetime, harnessing the power of dying stars, and engineering life at the molecular level. They watched with mild amusement as humans took their first tentative steps into the void with chemical rockets and radio signals. Ambassador Elena Chen stood before the Grand Assembly on Nexus Station, the massive orbital construct that served as the political center of the concordat. The curved chamber rose hundreds of meters above her, filled with the representatives of civilizations that had been traveling between stars when humans were still discovering fire. The air hummed with translation fields and the soft murmur of 17 different biological respiratory systems. The United Earth Confederation requests full membership status in the Galactic Concordat, Elena stated, her voice steady despite the dismissive glances from the delegates surrounding her. High Counselor Thrazix of the Mythari, an ancient species of crystalline beings who communicated through light patterns dancing across their translucent bodies, responded with a flash of colors that the translator rendered in Elena's earpiece. Your species has barely mastered fusion propulsion. Your computational systems are primitive. You have no understanding of quintessential physics or dimensional folding. The colors pulsed with what Elena recognized as the Mythari equivalent of condescension. You would not survive the initiation protocols. We may lack your technological advantages, Elena replied, but humanity offers unique perspectives. Our adaptability. Adaptability is the refuge of the technologically deficient, interrupted Ambassador Creel of the Voxani Dominion, his 6 eyes blinking in sequence. The Concordat maintains standards that have served us for millennia. The human petition is denied. Elena returned to Earth with the disappointing news. Humanity would remain classified as a developing species, granted limited trade rights, but excluded from Concordat protection and knowledge sharing. Earth's scientists continued their work, reverse engineering what little technology they could from limited exchanges with more sympathetic species, but the gap between human capabilities and Concordat standards remained vast. 3 years later, the first reports of the Void Cascade reached Earth. The phenomenon had begun in the Cygnus Arm, far from Earth but deep within Concordat space. Entire star systems were going dark, communication networks failing. Initial investigations found planets intact but devoid of all technology. Quantum computers, antimatter engines, neural interfaces, all reduced to inert matter. The most advanced civilizations of the Concordat found themselves suddenly thrust back into pre-technological states, their citizens left stranded across hundreds of worlds. The effect spread like a wave through space, defying all attempts at containment or analysis. The Mythari, with computational abilities that could model the behavior of entire galaxies, could not predict its movement. The Voxani, masters of 11 dimensions, could not determine its origin. Even the reclusive Encourage, whose bioships used organic technology beyond human comprehension, found their vessels transforming into lifeless husks at the edge of affected regions. For the first time in thousands of years, the Concordat faced an existential threat it could not understand. 6 months into the crisis, with a third of Concordat space affected, a desperate message reached Earth. The Void Cascade was approaching the Sol system, and the Grand Assembly requested humanity's assistance, not because they expected help, but because they had exhausted all other options. Elena Chen, now Director of Extraterrestrial Affairs, assembled a team of Earth's brightest minds, not just physicists and engineers, but anthropologists, historians, artists, and philosophers. They were transported to the Nexus Station aboard a Voxani diplomatic vessel, granted emergency clearance to the Concordat's central data repositories. You understand we do not expect solutions, High Counselor Thrazix told Elena as they watched the humans pore over data streams in the central analysis chamber. Your presence is a formality, a gesture of inclusivity before the cascade reaches your world. Yet you've provided us access to your entire knowledge base, Elena observed. That suggests a sliver of hope. Hope is irrational when faced with inevitability. Elena smiled. Hope is the most human trait of all. For 3 weeks, the human team worked tirelessly, approaching the problem from angles the Concordat had never considered. Where the alien scientists had focused on the physics of the phenomenon, humans examined patterns in affected systems, cultural responses, historical analogies from Earth's past. They worked with pencil and paper when quantum interfaces proved too complex, built physical models from station materials when simulations failed. On the 23rd day, Dr. Kazuo Yamamoto, a historian specializing in technological regression, noticed something the Concordat had overlooked. The void cascade didn't target all technology, only technology that operated on certain principles. Simple mechanical devices remained functional. Basic electrical systems survived. It was as if the phenomenon was selectively targeting advanced technology. It's not random, he explained to the assembled Concordat scientists. It's targeted. Elena watched as Dr. Maya Patel, a systems theorist, connected this observation to her own analysis. The cascade isn't destroying technology, she announced. It's simplifying it, reducing complexity to manageable levels. The Concordat representatives stared at the humans with incomprehension. The myth Ares' crystalline form pulsed with rapid colors that the translator couldn't keep pace with. The Voxeni representatives chittered among themselves. The other species demonstrated their own versions of consternation or dismissal. Impossible, declared senior theorist Zykax of the Encourage. Technology cannot be simplified without destructive entropy. Your primitive understanding of quantum mechanics is inadequate. Perhaps that's precisely why we can see it, replied Dr. Raj Singh, a quantum physicist from Mumbai University. You're all so advanced that you've forgotten the foundations. Your technology is so seamlessly integrated that you can't see the individual components anymore. Elena stepped forward. Counselor Thrazix, we believe the void cascade may be a defensive mechanism, perhaps created by a species or entity that perceives advanced technology as a threat. It doesn't destroy. It reverts to a safer state. Preposterous, Creel of the Voxeni huffed. No entity could possess such abilities. Unless, Elena suggested, they operate on principles entirely outside your frame of reference. The debate raged for hours, but the evidence compiled by the human team couldn't be dismissed. Their hypothesis, that the cascade was a deliberate action rather than a natural phenomenon, shifted the entire approach to the crisis. If it was a deliberate action, it could be communicated with. If it had intelligence behind it, it could be reasoned with. As the Concordat struggled to accept this paradigm shift, a new alert sounded through the station. The void cascade had changed course, accelerating toward the Nexus station itself. In less than 24 hours, the heart of the Concordat would face technological regression. Evacuate the station, ordered High Counselor Thrazix. Transfer all essential functions to secondary facilities in unaffected sectors. Wait, Elena interrupted. If we're right, running won't help. This thing is intelligent. It's targeting central nodes of advanced civilization. We need to face it, not flee from it. And how do you propose we do that? Demanded Creel. Elena looked at her team, at these humans who had been dismissed as primitive just months earlier. We go back to basics. We show that we understand. The plan that formed over the next few hours was unprecedented in Concordat history, not because of its complexity, but because of its simplicity. As the void cascade approached, the humans directed the Concordat to systematically power down their most advanced systems, to voluntarily simplify their technology. This is madness, complained a myth-airy scientist as Elena's team instructed them to disconnect quantum communication arrays and dimensional field generators. You're asking us to do what the cascade would do anyway. No, Dr. Patel corrected. We're signaling understanding and compliance. There's a difference between having something taken from you and offering it willingly. As the cascade's edge reached the outer sensor perimeter of the station, The humans had convinced the Concordat leadership to reduce the station to its most basic operational level: life support, simple electrical systems, mechanical backups. They had created, in effect, a technological white flag. Elena stood with High Counselor Thrazix at the station's central observation deck, watching as the wave of disruption approached. The normally brilliant vista of stars was now punctuated by dark voids where affected systems had lost the ability to transmit or receive data. "If you are wrong," Thrazix said quietly, "the Concordat as we know it ends today." "And if we're right," Elena replied, "it begins anew tomorrow." The wave reached them, washing over the station in absolute silence. They held their breath, waiting for the catastrophic failures that had befallen other Concordat installations. Nothing happened. The simplified systems continued to function. The voluntary regression had been recognized. For the first time since its appearance, the void cascade had passed over a major Concordat facility without effect. As the reality of what had happened spread through the station, Elena found herself surrounded by Concordat representatives whose dismissive attitudes had transformed into something new: respect. The humans, the primitive, underdeveloped humans, had seen what 17 advanced species could not. "How?" asked Thrazix, light patterns flickering in complex sequences across its crystalline form. "How did you know?" Elena thought about human history, about civilizations rising and falling, about technology gained and lost over centuries. "Because we remember what it's like to start over," she said. "Your species have known only advancement for thousands of years. You've forgotten that progress isn't always linear." The Concordat had called humanity weak until they needed our perspective. Now, as the Grand Assembly convened an emergency session to formulate a response to the cascade based on human insights, the galaxy was beginning to see that technological advancement wasn't the only measure of a species' worth, and humanity was finally being heard. The unconventional solution. The successful protection of Nexus Station marked only the beginning of humanity's involvement in the Void Cascade crisis. In the days that followed, Elena Chen and her team found themselves elevated from reluctant guests to essential advisors. The Grand Assembly Chamber, once a place where human voices were barely tolerated, now centered around their insights. Dr. Kazuo Yamamoto stood before the assembled representatives, gesturing toward a holographic display of affected and unaffected systems. "The pattern is becoming clearer," he explained. "The cascade doesn't target random technological centers. It's following development paths. Systems that advance too quickly are hit first and hardest." "That's impossible," objected Science Director Neelix of the Voxani. "Technological advancement doesn't leave physical signatures across space-time." "Unless," interjected Dr. Singh, "something is monitoring it. Has been monitoring it for a very long time." The implication sent murmurs through the assembly. The idea that some entity had been observing the Concordat's development, perhaps for thousands of years, challenged their fundamental understanding of their place in the galaxy. Elena stepped forward. "We believe the Void Cascade is a corrective measure, not a destructive one. It's not trying to eliminate advanced species. It's trying to slow technological advancement that exceeds certain parameters." "Parameters established by whom?" demanded Ambassador Creel, who had been among humanity's strongest critics before the crisis. "That's what we need to find out," Elena replied. "And to do that, we need to attempt communication." The proposal that followed was radical by Concordat standards. Instead of continuing to reactively respond to the cascade's movements, humanity suggested reaching out proactively. They would establish a contact point, a space station specifically designed to attract the attention of whatever intelligence guided the phenomenon. "You wish to draw this threat toward a specific location." High Counselor Thrazix's crystalline form pulsed with skeptical patterns. "That seems unnecessarily hazardous." "Not if we design the station to demonstrate understanding," explained Dr. Mayapattal. "We create a technological gradient, a deliberate demonstration of simplified technology existing alongside more advanced systems, but contained and controlled." The concept was revolutionary, a station that would showcase technological restraint rather than advancement. Where the Concordat had always pushed boundaries, humans proposed deliberately establishing them. Against considerable opposition, the plan was approved. Resources were allocated to construct what came to be called the threshold station in a system already affected by the cascade, where advanced technology had been neutralized. Humanity led the design phase, creating a habitat that operated on tiered technological principles: mechanical systems at the core, basic electronics in the middle layers, and carefully isolated advanced systems in the outer sections. 3 months later, Elena stood in the central chamber of Threshold Station alongside representatives from 12 Concordat species. The station hummed with activity as final preparations were made for their attempt at contact. This is how humanity faced first contact situations in our early space exploration, Elena explained to Thrazix as they observed the busy control center. We sent signals showing basic mathematical understanding, demonstrating rational thought. You assume this entity thinks as you do, Thrazix replied, light patterns shifting skeptically across its form. We assume it thinks, Elena corrected. The rest is educated guesswork. But that's what humans do best. The station's outward appearance was unlike any Concordat construction. Instead of the seamless, integrated design typical of advanced civilizations, Threshold Station featured exposed mechanisms, visible power conduits, and deliberately transparent operating systems. It was technology laid bare, showcasing process rather than just outcome. It's ugly, commented a Voxani engineer, all 6 eyes narrowed in disapproval. Dr. Singh laughed. It's honest. We're not hiding how anything works. That's the point. The signal they prepared was equally unconventional. Rather than the complex quantum communications the Concordat typically used, humanity proposed a simple radio broadcast, technology the Concordat had abandoned millennia ago. The message itself was a mathematical sequence demonstrating awareness of universal constants, followed by a simplified model of technological development with deliberate pauses at critical junctures. We're saying we understand there are points where advancement should slow, where consequences should be considered, explained Dr. Yamamoto. It's not just what we're communicating, but how we're communicating it. As the broadcast began, sensors detected the void cascade changing course, moving toward Threshold Station. The Concordat representatives grew tense, many questioning the wisdom of deliberately attracting the phenomenon. Some suggested abandoning the station despite the months of preparation. Hold positions, Elena instructed. This is exactly what we wanted. The approach of the cascade was different this time. Slower, more deliberate. It paused at the edge of the system, as if examining the station from afar. Instruments designed to monitor technological simplification detected no immediate effect. It's watching us, Dr. Patel whispered. For 7 days, the standoff continued. The cascade remained just beyond the system's edge, while the station continued broadcasting its message of understanding and restraint. The human team made minor adjustments to the signal, emphasizing different aspects of technological harmony, while the Concordat representatives grew increasingly restless. This experiment has failed, declared Ambassador Creel on the 8th day. The entity does not communicate as we do. We should withdraw and pursue containment strategies. It hasn't affected the station, Elena pointed out. That alone is communication. It's listening. On the 10th day, something unprecedented occurred. A section of the void cascade separated from the main body, forming a smaller wave that approached the station directly. Emergency protocols activated automatically, with many Concordat members rushing to evacuate. Wait, Dr. Singh called out, studying the readings. This is different. The energy signature is modulated. It's responding to our broadcast frequency. As the wave touched the outer ring of the station, the advanced systems there didn't fail as expected. Instead, they began operating on principles that the monitoring equipment couldn't analyze. Quantum processors showed patterns that defied established models. Energy conduits carried power in ways that shouldn't have been possible. It's not simplifying our technology, Dr. Patel realized with awe. It's teaching us. The phenomenon spread inward, touching each technological tier of the station in turn. Rather than regressing the technology, it was transforming it, not to a more advanced state, as the Concordat would define it, but to a more harmonious one. Systems began working together in ways the designers hadn't anticipated, creating efficiencies that defied conventional understanding. "This is impossible," muttered a myth-airy scientist, crystal structure flickering with agitation. "Technology cannot spontaneously evolve new operational parameters. Unless," Alina suggested, "what we're seeing isn't technology at all, at least not as we understand it." The realization swept through the station as data accumulated. The void cascade wasn't a weapon or a natural disaster. It was an intervention from a species so advanced that their technology operated on principles beyond the Concordat's comprehension. A species that had recognized that the Concordat's technological development had reached a dangerous inflection point. 3 days later, as the transformed systems stabilized, the first true communication arrived. Not as language or mathematics, but as a comprehensive data packet that unfolded into a multidimensional model within the station's central holographic chamber. The humans were the first to recognize what they were seeing. A map of technological development pathways, with clearly marked junctions where certain advances led to extinction-level outcomes. The Concordat had been approaching one such junction, accelerating toward it with no awareness of the danger. "They've been here before," Dr. Yamamoto said quietly, studying the model. "They've seen civilizations destroy themselves with unchecked advancement. They're not our enemies. They're our guides." The implications were staggering. The entity behind the cascade, which came to be called the architect by the human team, had apparently observed thousands of civilizations throughout the galaxy's history. It had seen patterns of development that led to sustainability and those that led to collapse. The Concordat, in its relentless pursuit of advancement without reflection, had triggered an intervention. "This changes everything," High Counselor Thrazix acknowledged, its crystalline form shifting to patterns never before recorded in the translator's database, the myth-airy equivalent of humility. In the weeks that followed, the architect continued to modify Threshold Station, transforming it into a learning center where Concordat scientists could study technological paths that balanced advancement with sustainability. The void cascade that had threatened galactic civilization began to recede, leaving behind systems with simplified but fundamentally more stable technological bases. Humanity's role evolved from initial interpreters to essential intermediaries. The human capacity for lateral thinking, for connecting disparate ideas and embracing contradictions, proved invaluable in understanding the architect's guidance. Where the Concordat species tended toward linear progression, humans saw the web of interconnections between technological choices and their long-term consequences. "You were right," Ambassador Creel admitted to Alina during a rare private moment. All 6 of his eyes focused on her, a sign of utmost respect in Voxani culture. "We needed your perspective, not despite your technological limitations, but because of them." Elena smiled. "Humans have a saying. Sometimes you need to step back to see the whole picture." As Threshold Station became the center of a new approach to galactic development, the Concordat began to reassess its fundamental values. For 12,000 years, they had defined advancement as the conquest of natural limitations: faster travel, more efficient energy extraction, greater computational power. The architect's intervention forced them to consider different metrics: sustainability, harmony, and the long-term survival of diverse life forms. Humanity, once dismissed as barely worth acknowledging, now stood at the center of this paradigm shift. Not because they had the answers, but because they knew how to ask the right questions. The galaxy had called them weak until they needed their help. Now, as the Concordat embarked on a new path of guided development, humanity's greatest strength was revealed: the wisdom to recognize that true advancement came not from conquering nature, but from understanding one's place within it, a new place among stars. 1 year after the establishment of Threshold Station, the Grand Assembly of the Galactic Concordat convened for its annual policy summit. The circular chamber of Nexus Station had been redesigned following architect principles, less ostentatious, more functional, with technology that served rather than impressed. Alina Chen, now bearing the title of Human Ambassador to the Concordat, stood at the central podium. Behind her sat the expanded human delegation, scientists and philosophers who had earned their places through contributions to what was now called the harmonic progression, the balanced approach to technological development guided by the architect's wisdom. Fellow citizens of the galaxy, Alina began, using the newly adopted form of address that acknowledged all sentient beings as equals regardless of technological advancement. Today marks the formal conclusion of the Void Cascade crisis and the beginning of a new era for all our civilizations. The assembled representatives, now numbering 23 species with the recent inclusion of 6 developing civilizations previously excluded from membership, responded with their various forms of approval. The Mythari pulsed with harmonious light patterns. The Voxani performed their ritualistic eye blink sequence. The newly admitted Farsal representatives vibrated their sensory filaments. High Counselor Thrazix approached the podium, its crystalline form modified with simpler lattice structures that reflected the Mythari adaptation to architect principles. The transition has not been without challenges, it acknowledged, but the data is irrefutable. Across all member worlds, we see improved resource allocation, reduced environmental degradation, and enhanced quality of life metrics. The statistical projections appeared in the chamber's holographic display. Civilizations that had adopted harmonic progression showed extinction probability reduced by 87.3% over 10,000-year projections. But numbers tell only part of the story, Alina continued. The true transformation has been philosophical. We have shifted from asking, "Can we do this?" to "Should we do this?" From "How quickly can we advance?" to "How wisely can we progress?" Ambassador Creel, who had once been humanity's most vocal critic, stepped forward. All 6 of his eyes were focused in the Voxani gesture of profound respect. None of this would have been possible without human insight. Our technological supremacy blinded us to the very dangers the architect sought to prevent. We required a perspective unencumbered by our assumptions. We required humanity. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. The species once deemed too primitive for Concordat membership had become essential to its survival. Human methodologies, interdisciplinary thinking, emphasis on historical context, the integration of artistic and scientific perspectives, had been formally adopted into Concordat educational protocols across all member worlds. Dr. Maya Patel, now serving as Director of Harmonic Studies, presented the next phase of implementation. The architect continues to provide guidance through the transformed systems at Threshold Station. We've identified 17 key technologies that require immediate reassessment and 43 developmental paths that offer sustainable alternatives. The list included technologies that the Concordat had taken for granted for millennia. Dimensional folding drives that had unknown effects on space-time stability. Consciousness transfer systems that fragmented organic identity. Energy extraction methods that created microscopic tears in reality. Alongside each potential danger, the architect had revealed alternatives, different approaches that achieve similar functions without the existential risks. What some initially viewed as technological regression, Dr. Patel explained, has proven to be technological redirection. We aren't moving backward. We're moving laterally, exploring paths not taken. The presentation continued with case studies from across Concordat space. The Encourage, masters of bioorganic technology, had restructured their ship-growing processes to create vessels that existed in symbiosis with space itself rather than forcing their way through it. The Voxani had modified their dimensional mathematics to work with natural cosmic fluctuations rather than overpowering them. The Mythari had transformed their crystalline computing from conquest-oriented information processing to harmony-seeking data synthesis. As the session progressed, Alina found herself reflecting on humanity's journey. 3 years ago, She had stood in this same chamber, pleading for recognition that never came. Now, human principles formed the foundation of a galactic renaissance. During a recess, she found herself approached by a delegation from one of the newly admitted species, the Linteri, methane-breathing entities whose technological development had been deemed too haphazard for Concordat membership under the old criteria. Ambassador Chen, their representative, bubbled through a translation field. Our gratitude is immeasurable. Under previous standards, we faced centuries of exclusion. The new emphasis on cultural wisdom alongside technological capability has given us a voice. Every perspective adds something unique to our collective understanding, Elena replied. That's the lesson humanity brought to the Concordat. The afternoon session focused on the continued relationship with the architect. Though direct communication remained limited to the complex data transfers at Threshold Station, understanding had deepened. The entity, or possibly collective of entities, appeared to be the survivors of a civilization that had faced its own existential crisis billions of years earlier. They had transcended conventional existence, becoming guardians who intervened only when developing civilizations approached critical junctures. They don't wish to control our development, Dr. Kazuo Yamamoto explained to the assembly. They wish to ensure we survive long enough to make our own choices. Think of them less as masters and more as archivists of cosmic experience. The final act of the summit was the ratification of the Threshold Accords, a new foundation for Concordat governance that formalized the principles learned during the crisis. Technological advancement would continue, but subject to comprehensive impact assessment across biological, cultural, and cosmic dimensions. Species would be evaluated for membership based on wisdom and perspective, as much as scientific achievement. The pursuit of knowledge would remain paramount, but tempered always by consideration of consequences. As Elena added her thumbprint to the document, a deliberately ancient method of authentication chosen to symbolize the enduring value of simplicity, she caught the eye of High Counselor Thrazix across the chamber. Your species has taught us humility. The Myth-Airy leader communicated directly through a private channel, a lesson we did not know we needed. And your species has taught us what's possible when wisdom guides potential, Elena replied. Together, we're stronger than either of us alone. The formal ceremony concluded with a symbolic activation of the new Concordat network, an interstellar communication system designed on architect principles. Unlike its predecessor, which had prioritized speed and data volume, the new network optimized for resilience and inclusivity, ensuring even the least technologically advanced members could participate equally in galactic discourse. As delegates dispersed to return to their homeworlds, Dr. Singh found Elena on an observation deck, watching the departure of the various ships, each modified now to reflect harmonic progression principles. Hard to believe where we were just a few years ago, he commented, gesturing at the spectacular view of harmonized technology in action. Fighting for recognition, barely allowed to speak in council. We were always capable of this contribution, Elena replied. We just needed the opportunity to demonstrate it. Do you think they would have discovered these truths on their own eventually? He asked. Elena considered the question, watching as a Myth-Airy vessel phased into subspace, not by forcing reality to bend, as the old technology had done, but by finding natural seams in the cosmic fabric and gently slipping through them. Perhaps, she acknowledged, but the architect suggested they were approaching a critical threshold. Sometimes, the most advanced civilizations can't see the precipice until they've already fallen over it. Human history is full of examples. Dr. Singh nodded. Civilizations that couldn't course-correct in time. The difference is, we remember our failures, Elena said. They're written into our literature, our art, our cultural memory. The Concordat had only ever known success, until they faced something their technology couldn't solve. Later that evening, at a reception celebrating the new era, Elena found herself in conversation with representatives from across the galaxy. Species that had once viewed humans with condescension now sought their insights on implementation challenges and philosophical questions. The dynamics had shifted fundamentally, not to human dominance, but to genuine collaboration. Ambassador Creel approached as the gathering was winding down, his formal robes replaced with simpler attire in the new Concordat fashion. "There's something I've wondered, Ambassador Chen," he said, mandibles clicking softly. "When the Void Cascade first appeared, and the Concordat faced extinction, did you feel satisfaction? After the way we had dismissed humanity, would there have been a certain justice in watching us fall?" Elena considered the question seriously. "There might have been a moment of vindication," she admitted. "It's human nature to want recognition. But that passed quickly. What replaced it was something more important, the realization that we're all in this together, advanced or developing, old or new. The universe doesn't care about our hierarchies or status. It only cares if we're wise enough to survive." Creel's eyes blinked in sequence, thoughtful rather than dismissive now. "The architect chose well in preserving your species long enough for our paths to cross." As the gathering concluded and delegates departed for their quarters, Elena took one last walk through the observation ring of Nexus Station. The view had changed subtly but significantly since her first visit years ago. Where once the space around the station had been cluttered with ships and structures designed to showcase technological prowess, now there was elegant simplicity. Vessels moved with the natural currents of space rather than against them. Energy systems pulsed in rhythm with cosmic background radiation rather than overwhelming it. The galaxy had called humanity weak until they needed their help. Now, as stars wheeled overhead and civilizations continued their journey together, it was clear that strength came in many forms. The ability to build was one kind of power. The wisdom to know when not to build was another entirely. And humanity, walking the middle path between primitive past and potential future, had proved to be exactly what the galaxy needed, not the most advanced species, but perhaps the most reflective one. Not the strongest, but the most adaptable. Not the wisest individually, but the most committed to collective wisdom. As Elena turned to leave, a notification appeared in her field of vision. The architect had sent a new data packet to Threshold Station. Initial analysis suggested it contained information about civilizations beyond the Concordat's known region of space. Other species, other challenges, other paths of development. The message was clear. This was just the beginning. The journey of balanced progress would continue, with humanity walking alongside the ancient civilizations of the stars, not as followers or leaders, but as essential companions on a path that would stretch into the infinite cosmos. The galaxy had found its balance, and humanity had found its place among the stars.